Mike, for the people who won't be able to put a name to the face, what's your full name?
Michael Eugene DeBellis.
Why don't you give us a little rundown as to the Michael? Who else was Michael in your family?
My mother's father, his name is Michael Guerriere. Apparently came from south central Italy, the province of Basilicata.
Mm-hmm.
We were just there last week trying to track down family names and so forth.
I want to have you tell us about that, but what about Eugene, part of your name now?
In the family, my mother honored the doctors that delivered us. So my brother was Pasquale Selden DeBellis. Pasquale after my father's father.
Uh-huh.
And the doctor that delivered me was a French doctor by the name of Eugene Dupuy. So I ended up with Eugene.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I assume that you found out something when you went to Italy about the family name. Can you tell us a little bit about what your trip and what you discovered there?
Actually, we didn't pick up too much new information.
Okay.
Apparently, my grandmother and grandfather, maternal grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
moved to Mott Street before they were married in the old St. Patrick's Cathedral on Mott Street. And all of their children were baptized there. The grandchildren, for the most part, were baptized there. That's where I was baptized. They were buried from there. So I could have gotten all of this information if I would have spent a few more days in New York City.
Mm.
They were rather lax in getting information back to me as to when people were born and so forth. But the trip to Italy was well worth, going. It's a rugged country, beautiful. The roads, I never in my life have seen so many hairpin turns. I thought I had seen the worst of the roads in Corona Pass Highway in Colorado, which was, it was on an old railroad bed, narrow gauge railroad, that crossing streams, they took up the rails and nailed down 2x10 planks, and that's what you want to cross to get on the other side of the stream. That was nothing compared to going from about 800 feet above sea level to about a mile above sea level.
I take it you drove.
No, we let the bus
Good for you.
do the driving. But there were times when the back end of the bus was hanging over sheer drop.
Now, was this up in the north?
No, about where the ankle bone would be in the heel of Italy.
Yes.
It's beautiful, wonderful people. They couldn't do enough for us. It's the undiscovered part of Italy.
Now, this is the maternal side of your family.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you meet people that you didn't know, or did you revisit places and
No,
people that you have
didn't
contact
run
with?
into anyone from the family.
Okay.
But did run into 3 Brentwood students in the middle of nowhere. There was we kept looking at each other. We were on the same tour, and I know them from somewhere, and they knew me from somewhere, but they just weren't making the connection. And finally, Tommy kissed his wife, Marie, said, "Are you Mr. DeBellis from Brentwood?" And then everything started to fall into place. So we met Eddie, kissed her, and Eddie's wife, Heidi, and I can't remember her last name. I have it written down somewhere.
Now, they were students of yours back in the 60s.
Yeah, when they lived on Ohio Avenue in Brentwood. And that happens all the time. We run into someone, don't I remember you from, and it's just great.
Isn't that
great seeing the kids again.
Did you have a nickname growing up, Mike?
Mickey.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it came in handy, and sometimes it was a pain in the neck.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your father's side of the family and what your knowledge is of the history there.
side of the family, they came from a small town northeast of Naples called Arcadia, not too far from Basilicata, where mother's family, but apparently didn't know each other until they got to this country.
I was going to ask you that.
The older brothers in the family went to work very early to put the younger ones through college. And so that my grandfather, Pasquale DeBellis, pushed education. And those that went through college on kind of on the backs of the older brothers were expected to help put my generation through school. And for the most part, that's what happened. Yes. My Uncle Hannibal, who was a physician in New York City, he was at St. Vincent's Hospital, was one of the founders of the College of Cardiology.
Was your father's brother?
Father's brother. Was also quite a good artist. Matter of fact, all of the brothers had some artistic talent.
Do you have some of that?
Very little, but enough to express myself when I have to. Mm-hmm. But Uncle Hannibal became a sculptor for the Navy. And when a man became full admiral, he designed a medallion in commemoration of that event. And some of those are in the Smithsonian. If you go down to St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan, in the Spellman wing, there are a number of big bronze plaques of Mother Cabrini. These are...
These were your uncles?
My uncle did those. He did a statue of Mahatma Gandhi, a half-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi that the Indian consulate bought. And then when the Hungarian uprising occurred,
in 1956,
he was very much moved and did a pietà of his feelings, which went to the freedom fighters there. And I don't know whatever happened to that bronze. But
that's a wonderful story. Yeah. How many brothers and sisters did your father have? Was it just Hannibal?
9 altogether.
9.
7 boys in the family and 2 girls. Henry was the oldest, and he used to make, as a hobby, stringed instruments. He would buy these huge columns that would support the floors in the old brownstone buildings, replace it with iron post, take this piece of wood and slab it, and then make violins, cellos. As a hobby, he was a barber.
My goodness.
And museums used to ask him to authenticate old musical instruments, which he did.
Because of his knowledge.
And all of it self-learned. Didn't go to school for it.
Yes. Were all of your uncles on your father's side, or perhaps either side, born in this country? Or
no. From my father back, they were born in Italy. My father was born in Arcadia.
Yes.
And the rest were born here.
Were born here. That's my
the
question.
Younger crew.
Mm-hmm.
All of them were involved somehow in the arts. Like 2 of the youngest ones were commercial artists. That's how they made their living.
What about your children? Do you see any of those qualities turning up?
Claudia.
Yes.
Is a pretty good artist.
Is she?
And David, who's a physician right now, is pretty good. Yeah.
Carries on a family tradition as well. Yeah. And on your wife's side of the family, how many were there, brothers and sisters that you had?
My wife had 4. There were 4 girls in the family and 1 boy. They had rather odd names. Mm-hmm. There was Haiti and Hedwig and Helen and Enid, named after the current book that my father-in-law happened to be reading. So one of them was from the Tale of Two Cities, if I remember right. But anyway, that's how he named the children.
Yes.
Except for Helen, who was named after his sister. And that's my wife.
And you all grew up down in the Lower East Side then?
No.
No.
Born on 8th Avenue, between somewhere around 14th or 15th Street. It was 148 8th Avenue. And we stayed there until I was about 5.5 years old. Then we moved out to the country. It must have been somewhere around 1929. The country at the time was Corona, Queens. Dirt road, no sidewalks. The first car my father bought got stuck in the mud about a block away from the house, and we had to get it to the house on planks. Within a year, we had sewers, sidewalks, paved roads. I couldn't believe, the changes that occurred.
And then the Depression.
It didn't affect the family that much.
Uh-huh.
My dad worked through the entire Depression.
Mm-hmm.
We cut back. He had this house built in Corona, a 3-story brick house.
Sounds like you were one of the fortunate.
He worked 2 jobs.
Uh-huh.
Dad did, and he never turned his back on a chance to earn some money, and I think that went toward the house.
Yeah. Tell me about your own children, the birth order and the names and what they're doing.
Well, I mentioned Claudia. She was the firstborn. I was in college on the GI Bill, and she's presently a special ed teacher in Brentwood. Mike Jr. Is about 5.5 years younger, and he's currently living up in Hurley, New York. Hurley or maybe Woodstock, that area. He's working for IBM and has been for since he went to work. And so he's up there. The next were a set of twins. David is a physician up in Poughkeepsie. And Thomas is a vice president for Citicorp. And, I think the kids have done well. We put a lot of money into their education. I don't think a penny of it was wasted. They never come home with anything less than a B. And Tommy graduated with a bachelor's degree in under 3 years from Worcester Polytech. He really worked hard. Went through summer schools. They were on a quarter system of, you took 4, or you could actually take 5 quarters in a year. So he got out early, and David went to Johns Hopkins, and he also got out in about 3 years, was accepted at medical school, but stayed to finish a 4th year, taking courses that would normally be part of the filling in your background. Like he took up mandolin playing, viola, and we used to tease him. He took up tap dancing. You're going to go tap dancing into the operating room, David? Yes. But, he did a pretty good job.
I haven't asked you about your wife, and I haven't asked you how you guys met, and maybe you can tell me about that.
We both went to Newtown High School about the same period of time. I was 2 years ahead of her, but I didn't meet her until after I graduated. I had a younger sister, Nan, who was going to Newtown High School while I was going to NYU. I'd started NYU. And she wanted to go to a dance. And my mother said, you can go if Michael will pick you up and drop you off, the whole story. So I was there to pick up Nan. And there was a group of girls off in the corner at the dance. And there was one of them who was quite vivacious. And matter of fact, she was doing a hula dance at the time. And I decided I wanted to meet her. And I spoke with her, and she was very cordial. When I asked for her phone number, she says, no, because we haven't been properly introduced. And I said, okay. So I went to the chaperone. The chaperone had been a woman that my Uncle Henry had gone out with, but they never married. I don't know why. They were two great people. And she said, oh, fine. So Miss Grandy took me over to Helen, said, this is Michael DeBellis, comes from a nice family, and I'd like you to meet him. So everything was done. So I said, now can I have your phone number? And we dated.
Where was Newtown High School?
Elmhurst.
Okay.
We dated a few times. And I had expected to go into service, which I did. Ended up in the Air Force. And at that time, you didn't go steady the way the kids, you went with a particular girl to roller skating because you had a good time with her at roller skating. And I remember, I think must have been the first date I went out with Helen, I took her roller skating. Now, Helen's a foot shorter than I am. She probably stands about 4'10" right now, on her tippy toes. But I walked sideways for about a week afterwards, and I decided that no more roller skating with Helen. And, we gradually, I guess, narrowed it down and decided to get married.
Yes. Are there any grandchildren that we should be talking about here?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Claudia has two. And
what are their names?
That's Frank and Adriana.
Ages at the moment?
It's difficult. Frank is probably 19, and Adriana is about 17. I know she's driving, so.
Any qualities that you've seen in the family appearing in the grandchildren, or unique talents or abilities that you see beginning to surface?
Not
and they're going to hear this now.
Yeah, a penchant for foreign languages by Adriana. She's a senior out in Medford High, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. She is taking currently 3 languages, and is quite fluent in Italian. And the others, she's doing very well.
Great skill.
And Mike has 2.
Did you leave out another one of the children?
I was going to say Claudia has remarried.
Yes. And
there are 2 children
that
her has, and so she has 4 children now.
All right, and their names?
Michael.
Okay, that fits very nicely.
Yeah, we accepted him, and Daryl.
Great.
And
okay.
I mentioned Mike has 2. Alicia, who's about. Alicia is just started college, so she's probably about 18. And Jason, who's, I'm going to take a guess and say about 7, 7 or 8.
Do you get much of a chance to visit with the families? Do you
we
have contact? I know you're getting ready to go south as we speak.
We're ready to head south, and we have a van, so that though we own the house in Huntington, that's one of the bases up here, and we'll do some traveling in a van. And it's very nice. We don't have to disturb anyone. David put a plug on the outside of his house so I can plug a 30-amp line in. And
so you can visit and still have privacy.
Privacy.
Wonderful.
And
great idea.
Yeah, it it works out quite well. David has, by the way, 2 children. Juliana, who's, as she says, I'm now a grader. She's in the 1st grade. She's out of kindergarten. And Stephen, who has the ability, I think, to walk through walls. If he doesn't end up as a football player, I don't know who will.
Yes.
A very husky kid. He's going to be 2 in December. Just
Interesting age.
Yeah, just a great to be around.
Now, you've told us where you were born, and did you say when you were born, Mike? I don't remember.
Yes,
if I asked you that
I was
question.
born May 5th, 1924.
1924.
So I'm 75 and a half years old.
You have undoubtedly a treasure trove of childhood memories. Can you tell us a couple of the things that you remember, the earliest memories that you have?
The earliest memory? Oh, God, I hate to admit this, but I remember a lot of very early activities. People say it's impossible. You can't do that.
At what age do you think these memories were?
Age anywhere from 1.5 to 3.
Okay, no, it's possible, sure.
For example, I used to like to make models out of, I had these little building blocks. And we lived at the time on 8th Avenue. There was a coal stove in the kitchen with a bucket of coal and some kindling. And I used to be able to play on the floor. There was a shaft of sunlight that came through in the afternoon and play in the sun on the kitchen floor. And I would make things. And I started to get tired of making and having to undo. So I looked for something more permanent. And my father had a pot of, he called it fish glue. It was probably made from animal hides. And I set that on the kitchen stove. Yep, it did smell. And I glued my blocks to the kitchen floor. My mother just assumed that I was playing. When Dad came home that day, he says, Mickey, that's pretty. Now put it away. And he nudged it with his toe and it didn't move. Dad ended up making a dam around this train with towels and poured hot water to loosen it. And I remember that. I also remember they gave me a wooden train, which I didn't really want. I wanted something electric, something that moved, that I didn't have to go choo-choo around the kitchen with. And went over to my grandmother's house, which was walking distance from our house on 8th Avenue. They were between 8th and 9th on about 17th Street. They were, I think it was the High School of Fashion or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was turned loose in the backyard, which was a little formal garden. And I decided to bury the train. And I buried it going out on the right-hand side of the garden, under the bushes. And when it came time to go home, I didn't know where it was. But there were a few things like that, that I could remember. I remember people, I was being pushed in a stroller, people giving me fruit or, a slice of bologna when you went to the butcher type thing. It was, I enjoyed growing up. I learned a lot of things. My father taught us how to do everything, things that were not part of his job. He was a lithographer. But we learned how to make cement and how to drive a nail and wire a plug.
All things that were going to save you a lot of money later on.
And both boys and girls learned. My sisters also learned how to mix cement. And mother taught us how to sew. And both of them taught us how to cook. So that, when we went away, when I went into service, I had no problems being self-sufficient.
Survival skills.
Yeah.
Speaking of your mother, what was her maiden name?
My mother was Matilda Guettier.
Okay, yes.
And
do you have a a childhood memory of your mom that stands out? Something that was characteristic of her? Or?
Yeah. She used to sing a lot, and especially when, she'd rock us to sleep. And I can remember, hearing that sound of her voice.
Did she have, women of that generation had a very different experience than the same age group of women today, but did she have something that really gave her pleasure that she had time to indulge herself in?
Oh. She focused basically around her family. The family came first. That's what she enjoyed doing. Yeah.
Do you have any outstanding memories of grandparents on either side of the family? You knew your grandparents, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there some things that you remember that you can tell us about?
Well, my grandmother, Serafina, on my mother's side, spoke very little English, but we used to be able to communicate. And living on the Lower East Side, it was an area where there were a lot of push carts. And she would go shopping there, and she would take me shopping. And with her limited vocabulary, she drove a hard bargain.
Did you ever learn to speak Italian like growing
I
up?
didn't study Italian until I got to high school. The family encouraged us to speak English, to be part of the country we were living in, and we had to go to school to learn how to speak Italian.
Yes. There obviously you were one of a rather large family. Were there times during the year when the family got together and everybody got together?
At the drop of a hat,
Uh-huh.
My father would get in touch with his sister Mary, who lived in Brooklyn, and we would bring part of our Sunday dinner over, and we would have Sunday dinner with Aunt Mary or Uncle Vincent, another brother that lived in Astoria. Yes, we socialized a lot. I can remember my mother's sister Kate, Christmas dinner would be on a table that went through the dining room, through a bedroom, and just seemed to extend forever. And there would be...
This sounds like a railroad flat.
And that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
I can remember Aunt Kate with a bag full of nuts, mixed nuts, walking the length of the tables, strewing nuts along, and you pick that one there and you pick another one in another place.
That's a great memory.
Yeah, and mother had, there were 5 sisters. The 2 oldest ones, Rachel and Madeline, were strawberry blondes. Beautiful, beautiful women. All 5 of them were beautiful. And the last 3 were Catherine, Matilda, and Josephine. And we have some pictures of them that they were knockouts. Beautiful women.
You obviously were, family life is very important in your growing up. Is that, I suspect that's a tradition and that's a value that you've carried to your own present family. And you've mentioned the frequency with which you're able to visit one another.
There were a lot of family activities. For example, the winemaking this time of the year.
Oh, yes.
Going into, probably mid-November.
Was that your father's
family
interest or hobby? Or?
Well, it was all of the brothers made the family wine together. They had this brownstone house. They dug a sub-cellar. So there was a basement, a cellar, and a sub-cellar.
Wow.
And underneath the backyard was a wine cellar covered with about 3 feet of dirt. So that formal garden out back covered the wine cellar. And they had the barrels were down in there. They would get, it seemed to me, almost a carload of grape. And the grapes would be dropped off, by horse and wagon. They came from the trains at the time ran on 10th Avenue, which were a couple of blocks away. Mm-hmm. And they would go down there, select the grapes, and have them delivered. And they made chutes. You put the grapes on them, and they were stacked up down the cellar, and according to what type of grape.
I bet you can smell that aroma now.
It was great. I could, and there were jobs for everybody in the family. One of the children his job might be taking the cover off the boxes. Another one knocking the nails out of the boxes. The stems were pulled off out of the bunch because you didn't ferment the stems. It would give you a bitter wine. And they would crush the grapes. Some of the grapes, some of the juice was fermented immediately without the skins, and that made a very light-colored wine. Some, where they wanted a darker wine, they'd leave the skins there, and depending upon how deep red they wanted, they would let the grapes, ferment a little bit longer with the skins.
Talk about a cottage industry. You had the wine presses, and
they had wine presses. They had some huge ones. There was one my dad had. It was about 6 foot high, 7 foot high, and it would squeeze the grapes so hard, so dry, that you could burn it. I can remember heaving that into the furnace. And
the residue,
the
skins,
what did they call it? Pumice, I think it was.
But that took you through the year, then.
That took the 7 brothers and 2 sisters through the year, and the grandparents.
Yes.
And they bottled some. They had a custom where they would make a sparkling wine when each child was born. Barrels was set aside and then bottled, and they would add some sugar and yeast, maybe a drop to each bottle, and then cork it, wire the cork in place. But underneath the wire, they would put a penny of the year that the child was born. So, my sister was 1930, and there was a 1930 penny on her wine. And this was opened when they became engaged or got married.
What happened during Prohibition now with all
Prohibition?
Of this? Yes, exactly. You've answered my question, yes. Great. That's great.
They had wine.
They had wine. Listen, with all of the adults that you had around you teaching you things, were there other adult influences early on that you could say had a profound effect upon your later growing up, or your values or ideas, other than family and mother, father?
Well, there was my 2nd grade teacher. We were sent off to parochial school, St. Leo's School in Corona, and I ran into some people from there not too long ago. And my 2nd grade teacher, Sister Mary Jane, was a wonderful, wonderful person. And she used to, if you had been good during the week, you were given a small Mary Jane bar. And we knew that her family owned the Mary Jane factory. We knew it. It had to be. There's no other way she could be giving out these Mary Jane bars. And, you might be given one, Michael, because you brought flowers for the Madonna. And John, because you did all of your homework this week. Every kid got a Mary Jane bar for some reason before they left for school on Friday. And she was not a high-pressure teacher. It seems though you learn by conversing with her, but she was everywhere. She knew when a child needed help, just a very caring person. And I thought she was great, just wonderful person.
Who influenced your career choice? I mean, the decision to pursue education or to become an educator had to have started someplace.
Yeah.
I hear your grandfather's influence in there by stressing education, but who or how did that happen, Mike?
All right. There are two things. We got married before I graduated college, 2 years before I graduated college. And we had Claudia at my graduation.
Yes. Ah.
I had originally planned to go to medical school.
Where did you go to college, by the way?
New England College is where I graduated from.
Okay.
I had started at NYU. I really did not like NYU.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me to be like a factory.
Yeah.
And
And this would have been when now? What year would you have been attending there?
At NYU,
50s?
No,
40s?
42.
42.
Approximately.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was drafted from there.
Okay.
At that point, I could make my own decision.
Yes.
When I got out. Wanted to go to Hofstra, but Hofstra was a big white colonial building at the time and was advised not to. And I ended up in New England College, which was a small liberal arts school, strong in personal contact, small classes, good science department. Dr. Shaffrath, who later went to C.W. Post, he transferred, headed up their department. It was what I was looking for. And I took all the science they had, sent applications out to different medical schools that I felt I could handle. Meantime, waiting, I decided I better have a secondary backup program. So I switched over to, after I graduated, to Keene Teachers College and took all of my required education courses to get certified in New Hampshire. I finished those in January 50, no, it was January 51 when I finished, and was sent off on an interview in Pennacook, New Hampshire, and was accepted to go to work. And I thought, well, let me see how this is going to work out. I enjoyed it. I wanted to learn as much as possible, so I spoke with the principal, and he was like another teacher to me, and showed me how to take care of records and all of the things that were necessary to run a school. I took care of the audiovisual department for the entire district, did research on what was the expected growth, and I recommended that they put an addition on the high school, which they did, and I come pretty close to the projected enrollment.
You had early experience as a central administrator then already.
I learned a lot up there. I learned a lot. And the superintendent, Hounsel, his name was also my advisor from the VA. And he was very helpful. And during,
where was your time in the service spent, Mike? I didn't ask you
I
that.
spent, basic training was in Miami. And I was on the third floor of a nice hotel on 38th Street and Collins Avenue. Shared the room with an old person. He was 38-year-old grandfather, snow white hair, who suffered terribly from all of the drilling. The shoes just chewed into his skin. And finally, we were able to convince the Army that maybe he didn't need basic training. Maybe he should be put into the finance part, because he was did CPA work in civilian life. And they finally moved him out before he finished his basic. So I had this beautiful room third floor. No one ever came up to inspect it. And I had a
Sounds
very
like
nice.
a good time.
That was a great time. I figured Army life couldn't get any better. They shipped me to California, Glendale, and I attended Curtis Wright Technical Institute there in the Air Force. That we lived at the country club, and our phys ed included golf, swimming, tennis, and things like that. And that was great. We paid $55 a month to the Glendale. And for that, we got room and board, laundry done, dry cleaning done.
This doesn't sound like a military experience.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it was just great.
Wow.
And we had Class A passes. You go anywhere we wanted to after 3 o'clock and be in class the next day.
Did you ever leave the States at all during that
During that
time?
period, no.
Oh.
Well, I did go down to Mexico.
Okay.
And we spent a little time there. From there, we were put into reality. We were sent up to Utah for Arctic training. We were supposed to go up to the Aleutians. So going from this beautiful warm climate into bitter cold, trying to work on airplanes up there, and finished our training, the overseas training, put us on a boat, shipped us to the South Pacific. Reality number two.
That sounds so typically military, or so typically.
And I finished out. The war ended while I was in Aishima, which was near Okinawa. Getting ready for the invasion of Japan. That's when the war ended.
Do you remember the day that you heard the war was over?
Oh yeah. Up until from the time they dropped the bomb until that point, our big worry was, are they going to retaliate with poison gas? Now, we had long since lost our gas masks. We had no need for them, and the case was good for a shaving kit.
Yes.
And that was at least my big worry. Are they going to come back with poison gas?
So that you breathed a sigh of relief when you heard the war was over. You and I have lived, or both of us have lived through some very monumental historical events. And we could probably talk endlessly about all of those. I will just ask if you've ever had, as one of your heroes, a president of the United States.
Yeah.
And who would that have been?
Kennedy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he would have been great for the country. And what he started, it's a shame it's been dismembered. But he's a person I was glad was elected, and sorry that he left us so soon.
Yes. What was your first paying job, Mike? I'm going to take this another way here. Now, the job for which it could have been part-time, but you were given some money for it, doing something.
I did many, many part-time jobs, anything to earn $1. Sometimes it was only a quarter, but anything to earn some money. Taking out ashes. The street we lived on in Corona was 102nd Street, populated by my mother's relatives. And Aunt Vera would give me a quarter a week to take out the ashes from her cellar. And it was a regular thing. I would go down Saturday morning, bright and early, take the ashes out. After I raked them to pick out the pieces of coal that was still burnable, I would wash windows, 25 cents for the windows on the ground floor. My aunt who lived on the second floor said, I'll give you a quarter if you wash my windows. I figured, well, I can handle that. I'll get my brother Pat to help me carry the ladder down. And my brother Pat helped me carry the ladder down. He turned out to be a better businessman than I did, because he said, okay, that'll be a nickel for putting up the ladder.
Yes.
So I figured, all right, I'll wash them for 20 cents, and came time to take the ladder back. I said, Pat, I need you to help me take the ladder back. He said, be another nickel. So I earned a lot of money doing part-time job, I did a lot of cooking, which was a carryover from my mother instructing us on how to cook. I did cooking in service when the war ended. They sent home our mess sergeant and baker. So I did some baking first, and then the COs asked me to become mess sergeant. So I was promoted to sergeant, and I did cooking in service. And I also did it when I was going to college up in New Hampshire for a group, American theater group from Washington, D.C. I would cook for them for the weekends, for the summer.
Yeah.
And I cooked at a place called Fox Chase Inn, where I learned an awful lot. The chef there was a Southern person who he knew how to cook. Unfortunately, I remember one of the things, he was a teetotaler, and they had been out fox hunting, and they were going to have a hunt breakfast. And part of the hunt breakfast was this foamy punch, and prime ingredient was rum. And of course, he wouldn't taste it. Now, I'd have to taste it. And how do you describe to a teetotaler what it tastes like?
Yes.
You know, I felt as though I was going to get smashed every Saturday making this foamy punch. But I learned a lot cooking with him.
Yeah.
And I still do a bit of cooking.
Yeah, and you enjoy cooking, of course.
Matter of fact, 14 years ago, with Dipso, I would put together a portable tailgate party, and I had big, thick, insulated boxes that I put the food in, go up to West Point with the crew, set up this tailgate party, and of course the stuff would still be piping hot, and we'd have a party before.
Great.
And if there was anything that got by Gary Mintz, I don't know if you remember Gary,
Yes,
with his gosh, blessed appetite, we'd have a tailgate party after the game was over. So, you know, I was able to do a bit of cooking.
With your knowledge of the wine business, I'm surprised that you didn't open up a winery on Long Island with all of the industry that we have here now on that. Mike, I wanted to ask you, are you a morning person or a night person?
I'm usually, when I was working, I'd be up by 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Yes.
I like to get to the building early, walk the building with the custodian, see if there was any visible problems. You know, the roof at South had a tendency to leak, and so you had to be especially careful if it rained. The library roof in a windy, driven rain used to leak, and so you had to make sure that was taken care of. And then I'd check in with the cafeteria, and you know, did she have all her complement? Did she need any help? And one day, the two of us were the only two that showed up, and so I helped her with the cooking. And they have pictures in one of the yearbooks of me serving lunch to the kids that showed up.
Did you continue that after you retired? Do you find you still get up early or
Yeah, fairly early.
You know, okay.
I'd like to sleep later, but you get up. And,
all right.
Yeah.
It's an
Nobody's
internal clock.
Yeah.
We've already talked about what schools you attended pretty much, and I don't think that there's anything there that you've talked about the teachers that have influenced your life. Let me ask you, how did you come to Brentwood? How does this Brentwood story begin?
Well, the Brentwood story began a year before I actually got here. I had been teaching up in New Hampshire. My father was not well, and I started to look for an opportunity to come back down to the New York area. I had to line up before I could leave Pennacook, New Hampshire, I had to line up a teacher replacement because this was mid-year when I started to look. Did not want to teach in the same area where I was going to live. I didn't feel it would be fair to the children. And I started to look around. The Brentwood Village School was a dead ringer for the Pennacook High School. Small. I figured, well, here's a nice little quiet place that I could put roots down, and was quite surprised later on. But I was interviewed by Fred Weaver and Burl Knott for a science position. And they said they would get in touch with me. This was during the summer. And I went up to, at the meantime, I was selling insurance for Metropolitan Life. And we were up in the Catskills on a 2-week vacation at Helen's folks' summer place. I was fishing in a stream, probably half a mile from the house on Route 42. Mailman stopped. I thought it was the game warden first, and he informed me to call such and such a number, speak with the operator, and next thing I know, I'm connected with Fred Weaver. He found out that I was fishing. I don't know how Fred Weaver found out I was fishing up there, but God bless Fred, he found out. And I was offered a job. I didn't find out until probably a month before I started that it was for social studies. Now, I had a lot of social studies. History had been a hobby with me. And I was hired as a social studies teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And
had you been told anything about Brentwood before you came here? Did you know anything about the community?
Yeah, it was at the time was a small community,
A quiet rural area,
a bedroom community.
bedroom community.
Is the way it was described.
Now, what year would this have been, Mike?
Probably 55,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere 55, 56. That period.
Anything about the interview with Burl Knott and Fred Weaver stand out in your memory?
Yeah, Burl kept asking me questions about history.
Okay.
And Fred asked me, how was the fishing? But I bet you I was the only one that was ever hired from a fishing stream. Yeah.
What about first impressions of the after having, or into your first year here? What did you think once you had?
They were on split session. It seemed as though they were forever on split session. The high school only went up to grade 10. So I taught 10th and 9th grade history. Then the kids that in the 11th and 12th grade was sent down to Bayshore High School to get their junior and senior credits. I felt that Brentwood was a nice place.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the kids. Certainly not much different than the kids up in New Hampshire at the time. And
who was in charge of the building when you began?
Fred.
Fred was. Okay.
Fred. And the younger kids were also in the building, grades 7 and 8.
Uh-huh.
And I believe Joe Graff was in charge of that group.
Now that must have, was that at the R.O.B.S?
No, that was all in the village.
It was in the village?
All in the village.
Okay. Uh-huh. The R.O.B.S wasn't there yet,
No.
I guess. They hadn't built yet. Okay.
No, they were in the blueprint process.
I see.
So, I saw that go up.
Your training and your past experiences obviously prepared you well for what you found here. It may have been a rough, a bumpy road, but you were comfortable in those shoes.
Now, the kids up in New Hampshire taught me a lot.
Okay.
We did a lot of hunting and fishing together. We had a club in New Hampshire. I got to know kids, and I found the more I got to know them, the less problems I had. And I tried to get kids involved when I was here. I remember I did a unit on transportation. And they could write a paper or make a model on transportation, any place in history. And we had them, and I was in, I think it was either 202 or 204 in the R.O.B.S building, had them all around the room, and people kept dropping by to see what the kids had done. And the kids were very proud of what they had done. I think because I worked with kids, the next thing I know, I was asked to be dean. So dean of boys with Fran Karen, who was dean of girls. We shared an office, and I gave everything up except lunch, I think. I'm not sure. I worked a long, long day. I must have done something right, because the next thing I know, Lenny Sachs, who was named principal of South Junior, asked me to become a. And I wasn't sure whether I was ready for it or not. And but I went over, and 2 years later, I was, principal. And
had you finished your graduate work at this point? Or
no,
were you
still in the process of working on it.
So you're teaching and going to school.
Teaching, going to school, and
raising a family.
Raising the family.
Busy guy.
It was. Especially when the twins came along, because I had to get extra work weekends.
What did you do?
Selling shoes. Kitty Kelly. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember Lou Cairo.
Yes.
He came over, and we worked at Kitty Kelly in Roosevelt Field, and I was able to get enough money to get Tommy out of the hospital. Both the twins were premature. Mm. But Tommy was in the incubator. He was just under 5 pounds. Mm. And he, it was a little period of time. It was almost a month. And that ran up quite a bill. And had to be paid. And
while you were active, both in the classroom and in an administrative capacity, Mike, there was always a job description that followed you. But I like to ask people this question. How did you define your own purpose? What was your mission?
Kids. What's best for the kids? I started, several programs occurred while I was at South. Kids were having trouble in regular classes because they did not speak English. And they were anxious to speak English, and they were anxious to be successful. And what I did, I pushed my class size to the limit, and lo and behold, maybe I could free up an English teacher or a math teacher, and maybe a foreign language teacher. These teachers were then assigned to a classroom, and they would tutor kids during their lunch period or whenever we could get the kids free to be with a teacher. So if they had a problem in math, they might be having part of their lunch period with a math teacher. I picked up a couple of kids maybe in the history classes. I felt that the kids knew what they needed. And, I think it was successful. Mm-hmm. I can remember one of the board members, his child was in the class where we getting help. And he mentioned the fact that there was a bilingual program hadn't been approved, you know. And I think because it was successful, they eventually.
Well, you were adept at pushing the envelope a little bit then.
Yes,
Yes.
If they.
You also, we were talking earlier about the importance of experiences to provide kids with, and you had said about the field trips that you used to take. You mentioned one field trip from before you even came to Brentwood, bringing kids down to the city.
Yeah, we raised money up in New Hampshire to fund this. I remember we did a science show, and one of the people in town, if you asked him what his place in the world was, he'd say an inventor, and he knew all about electricity. He made some Tesla coils that were very powerful, and he would send sparks across the we held some of these shows in the cafeteria in Pennacook. And one of the demonstrations, I held on to the Tesla coil. I was biting on a fork. There was an orange impaled on the end of the fork, another fork stuck in that with a wire coming off. And there was a light bulb in between, in part of this loop. And then he would give juice to the whole system, and you could feel the electricity going through. And you would have to try to hold your tongue tight against the fork handle, and the light would go on. I have a couple of chipped teeth in the back where it didn't, but that was a big part of the show.
That's putting yourself on the line.
Yep. And we got all of these, the kids down, they sold newspapers, they made candy.
But it became increasingly difficult to take kids on field trips, particularly when you came to Brentwood too, and there were all sorts of obstacles.
Yeah, that was one of the problems I felt, that they weren't doing enough for field trips. Ruth Rosenthal made big use of the Brookhaven lab, and I went out with her several times with her students, and as a place to go, but not setting enough money aside for field trips was a problem.
Yes, yeah. Well, money is not an unfamiliar problem to us in Brentwood. We've struggled with that time and time again. I want to get to another category of questions to have to do with your professional involvement over the years. But first, you're such an easygoing guy. Is there anything that makes you angry?
Well, I think of things that should have happened that didn't. Okay.
For example,
I don't know if you knew Ed Sonderling.
Right before my time.
Okay. Well, Ed was a shrewd
postmaster.
Waterworks.
Okay.
That was his building across the street. And we were interviewing people for assistant principal. And there were quite a few people there. And he says, I want you to tell me what's the biggest waste in Brentwood. And of course, people said, well, duplication of bus routes, they're not using both sides of paper, all of the, they're throwing away too much food in the cafeteria. And nothing satisfied Ed. And I don't remember who said it, but suppose you tell us what's the biggest waste in Brentwood. He says, when a kid fails, not only is the money wasted that went into paying for his education that year, but you wasted a year of his life. And that's something that, kind of stuck in my head. And, I think it's very, very worthwhile to keep in mind that when a kid fails, you wasted a year of his life.
let me ask you the questions now that have to do with your professional involvement. When you came to Brentwood, there was an organization that, well, at one point, Eugene Hoyt was superintendent of schools,
Yes.
and used to work with his staff. He worked with his faculty, worked with his administrators. There was an organization, but there was no union at that point.
No.
Were you, I will use the word advisedly here, politically involved at that point?
I tried to stay out of local politics. I felt that would be taken away from
By
my
local,
effort.
you mean district, or do you mean
I mean politics.
politics? Okay.
Okay. I think fortunately for Brentwood, it was at a minimum. Was I involved with the teacher group? Yes. Matter of fact, I showed them how to change their constitution so they could get some things done. The biggest problem, we never had enough people to have a 2/3 majority of membership present at the meetings. They were there when it came time to vote on salary, but the meetings in the course of the year, impossible to get the people there. And we finally had a meeting where there was sufficient people to get a 2/3 majority of membership. So that part of the meeting, we got
Where were these meetings held at that
in
point?
cafeterias, auditorium.
Yeah, okay.
I told them to immediately adjourn the meeting and call a second meeting, because you had to have 2 successive meetings, 2/3 majority, to change the Constitution. So we had the second meeting, changed the Constitution to be majority of the people present, and things started to get done. And that was part of the.
Were you, did you, well, first of all, what was the building, you may even have mentioned this, that your first assignment as a principal was in
South Junior.
Was in South. My recollection is the meetings occurred in that building.
Yep.
That's where BTA used to meet.
Yes.
Now, when you, and still
Yeah.
occur there, were you active as a member of the teaching organization, or did
I
you?
was treasurer.
You were treasurer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the books for the organization, remember the 2-penny notebooks
Yes.
in pencil? That's what I inherited.
Okay.
Kept track of all of the expenditures and the income in a little 2-penny notebook.
Now you became an administrator. Then your affiliation was to the Brentwood principals and supervisors. Yeah. When would that have occurred, Mike? About what year would that have occurred?
When the group separated.
We have a pesky gnat here. It's going back and forth between.
I think it's from the wine jug. The year that the group separated, and they were able to separate because they had changed the Constitution. Then I became part of the principals and supervised the organization. And, it was as active as I wanted to be. I was president a year or two.
Is there anything that we should mention in that context? Is there anything in terms of those years that we shouldn't leave untouched here?
Well, one of the things I got to appreciate more was Guy DiPietro. When you're in on the negotiations,
there you go.
Maybe. He was a good negotiator, very fair. I learned early that he liked to have the last word. You put a pound of chopped meat on the scale, but he would take a little pinch back for a meatball. Some of the guys used to say he negotiated like Attila the Hun, but I found that Guy was very honest. If he made a promise, he kept it. He was a good person, really a good person. I really deeply hurt when he passed away.
Yes. Yeah. Do you have any regrets looking back, Mike? Are you one to look back and say, "I wish I had"?
I don't like to look back, and
Good.
Then
let me put a turn on that. What, if anything, could you say you were most proud of your active years?
I think working with some of the kids who would have been left out of things. My secretary, Mrs. Nash, I don't know if you knew her. No. She had a reputation as being the dragon lady, but she was really a lovable person who unfortunately did not have children. And Stella every year would take a problem child and help that child. It might be a simple thing as, here, put these in the teacher's mailboxes.
Yes.
And, run off some stuff on a ditto machine. But she every year she picked a kid and wasn't named, but pretty soon you realized that that child belonged to Stella Nash and she helped him.
Yeah. I am very anxious to ask you these questions, and I recognize that we are running down on time. But I'm going to proceed for as long as we can, for as many of these as we're able to address. When did you retire?
About 11 years ago.
Okay, so we're in 99 now. So you've had about 11 years of practice.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying yourself?
Yes, very much.
We both hear stories of people who have a rough time with leaving the class or leaving active service. You haven't had any difficulty making the adjustment?
No. The biggest shock came the first September I wasn't in school. They opened school without me.
Yes. And the world goes on. Had you made the decision long in advance of actually leaving?
No, I had planned to retire at 65. I retired at 63. I fell off a 4-foot ladder, broke a couple of ribs, thought I was in the process of dying, and promised myself if I recovered, it felt as though there was a fluid going into my lungs. It just was an awful feeling.
A frightening experience.
Yeah, and I thought this, is this how it's going to end?
Yes.
And things were starting to get dim. And it turned out I broke a couple of ribs. And shortly thereafter, I put in my letter of resignation.
And did you regret that later? Nope. Okay.
Nope, because there were a lot of things to be done out there.
Yes.
Yeah, and
your last assignment was where you had been for a good many years prior to that. Then you were.
I was at South Junior until 5 years before I retired, and I was sent up to Northwest.
I see.
10th grade center, and Welch.
I had forgotten that.
Welch went to South. Mm-hmm. We switched. Mm-hmm. And
what was the total number of years of service, Mike?
36.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned many of the part-time jobs and the other things that you needed to keep both ends together. We've all had similar experiences. Do you remember what you earned the first year you came to Brentwood?
Well, I remember the first year in Pennacook was $11 a day, and that's when I discovered that it was per diem. I thought it was $55 a week, but no, it was $11 a day. So we hit the first vacation, I got $22. Yeah, we started a teacher organization up there, though it wasn't named that, where I asked the teachers to get 2 people that would vote with them under all conditions and stay to the bitter end of the town meeting. And they did, and we had a salary schedule, and we put it up for vote, and it was passed. And the elections, which took place right after, the president of the board didn't get elected that year. A wonderful nurse from Concord did. And it shook up things in town to the point of where the former president of the board stopped by my class, when it was in session, and wanted to talk if I were to get my union to vote for him at the next election, things would go well for me. And I said, there's no union, and we let it go at that.
What a rich experience to bring with you, though.
Yeah. Oh, it was. You can't imagine what it was like negotiating as a person for this with the school board. Just tell you one story, and then the woman that went in to see the board just before I went in, Barbara, had been in the district 20 years. Husband was a milkman in Concord. And the questions to her went, is your husband still working for the Concord Dairy? Well, that's the milk that was on your steps this morning type thing. Are the children finished with school? Well, they knew damn well that they were finished with college. And they gave her a $100 raise. When I went in, they asked me if I was still taking care of the audio visual for the district. I was. Was I still using my car for a kindergarten bus route? Yes, I was. And a couple of other questions. And they said, well, we'll give you a $200 raise. And I figured, something's got to happen to that. You can't go in and have your head on a block. And
very arbitrary.
Yeah, it wasn't fair. No. It just wasn't fair.
Mike, we haven't talked at all about what you have been doing in the last 11 years since you retired, and because of the limitations of our own time, I am afraid we're going to have to leave that to another time. But if there is anything that you could say to, let's say to the younger people who are coming into our profession today, with all of the changes that have taken place over the last few years, is there any word of advice that you might like to leave them with?
Plan for your retirement the day you start the job. I think it's very important, financially and emotionally. You should be ready. There were a lot of things I didn't do while I was working. I never played golf. I never played tennis. But I learned when I retired to play golf.
You learned to have fun, you're saying.
Yeah. I had a lot of activities. I worked with stained glass. A lot of things I'm never at a loss for something to do. Yeah. But there are some physical activities that you should take into retirement with you. And I think tennis and golf and swimming are very important.
Being good to yourself.
Yeah.
Michael DeBellis, you are a legend in Brentwood, and I know that there are many people who are going to enjoy hearing your story. It has been a privilege for me to help you tell it. Thanks so much for being with us.
Okay.